Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our eighth and final Zoom session for MPA 623. I hope everyone's week is off to a very good start. I am doing this session, as I told you, from lovely, scenic Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm at the National Social Science Association annual conference. I presented a paper this morning and sharing a panel tomorrow, and they'll be heading back to Southern California bright and early on Wednesday morning. So we'll be back in town soon, but so far tonight from the hotel, we have good connectivity. I hope that will carry through the remainder of our session tonight. I'm not planning a very long session since this is our eighth and final session. I kind of truncated the material I normally cover, and I thought instead what we would do tonight is talk about some of the requirements for effectiveness in public organizations, and then wrap up the entire show and kind of talk about some of the commonalities and some of the themes that help tie a lot of the different theories and theorists together that we talked about over the past 8 weeks. So I'm anticipating maybe about an hour or so, and we should be good to go for the evening. Thank you for Canvas essay number 7 on leadership. I thought those were all very insightful. Used the material and applied the material very well to your respective organizations. I've gone through all those that have been submitted, returned those back to you with some comments and some feedback. So those are all taken care of, which means that we are now down to 2 final assignments. One of your last 2 assignments, I guess, is your Canvas essay number 8. And Canvas essay number 8 is a pretty easy one in that you are just taking the information from your chosen solution part of your final paper and just discussing which solution or which solution plural you decided were most appropriate to address the problem in your organization, and then providing a brief justification. And so you'll be doing that as Canvas essay number 8, and then as always responding to at least one of your colleagues. And so you'll do that then by next Sunday, by March the 20th. Then your second assignment, which is your real final assignment for the class, is that chosen solution paper. And just to recap it again, in that chosen solution paper, all you're doing is you're going to provide me with the title page, then you'll provide your revised background paper. Now, if you didn't need to do any revisions to your background paper, that's absolutely fine. Then it can just get resubmitted the way in which you submitted it the first time. If you did make some changes and modifications, feel free to include those modifications in that section. So your revised background paper, then your revised alternative solutions paper. Again, if you didn't have any need to do any revisions, then you don't have to worry about any revised content. You can just put it in the way in which you originally submitted it. If you did make some modifications, and include those modifications. And then the new component that you're going to be creating for this paper obviously will be your chosen solution section. The chosen solution section typically is relatively brief. In the past, anywhere from like 2 to 5 pages, I think usually has gotten the job done, depending upon the number of solutions that you are recommending and how lengthy your justification needs to be for those recommended solutions. Again, you don't have to just pick one of your alternative solutions and make that your chosen solution. You can do a hybrid approach with 2 of the 3 or maybe all 3 of them. What I'm going to be doing when I read that section of the paper is I'm going to be focusing primarily on your justification. And so I'm going to look to see, did you provide a strong justification that yes, indeed, this solution or these solutions were the most appropriate to address the problem in that organization? Again, not terribly lengthy, 2 to 5 pages usually gets the job done. And then a reference page for any references that you use in the creation of the paper. So the only new thing that you're really creating is going to be that last section, the chosen solution section. Now, obviously, I've already read your background paper and provided feedback on that. I've already read your alternative solutions paper and provided feedback on that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time and focus very heavily on those first 2 parts of the paper. I'm going to just really target my attention on that chosen solution section. That's really what I'm going to focus my attention on. And most of the grade on that paper will be based upon that chosen solution section of your paper. It doesn't mean I'm not going to read the other sections that you're submitting, but I'm just really going to focus on that final chosen solution section. So really, put your time and effort into that. We have it due on Sunday, March 20th, because as you are all very well aware, it's kind of a weird schedule in that next Monday, you then venture off on spring break. and you're then on spring break for a week, and then you move directly into your next class in the program, which I think starts on the 29th, I believe. So that's why I'm having the paper and our final Canvas assignment due on Sunday by midnight. I don't think it'll be too difficult to get that done because there's not a lot of new writing that you're doing for either of those two assignments. And that way I can get those on Sunday. I can then review them, provide feedback, and have all your final grades ready to go on spring break. You don't have an assignment hanging over your head for spring break. You can enjoy your spring break and then move fresh into your next class, which then begins, I think, on the 29th. So that is the plan for how we are wrapping up our time together. So are there any questions about any of that material? Yeah, Melissa, go ahead.
I just have a question about the format on how we are submitting the paper. Like for instance, on my background paper, I had my abstract and then my paper and then my references. Am I just slapping that all together and having abstract paper references, and then the new one?
That's a good question. What you should probably do is don't include the abstract from each of the other two assignments, just the body of the assignment. So give me a title page. You give me an abstract, just a general abstract, and then just the content of that background paper, and then just the content of the alternative solutions paper, and then your new section on chosen solutions and a reference page. You don't have to rewrite the background paper or the alternative solutions paper to kind of make it flow. Don't worry about that. Just literally put the body of the background paper and the alternative solutions paper into this final paper.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sure, good question. Okay. All right, let's see who else. Michael, go ahead.
So a quick question on that. You mentioned when you graded a couple of the papers so far to see your corrections. I downloaded both those and I didn't see any like red highlight or anything. Is it possible I went to the wrong link?
Yeah, the way in which I usually put the feedback in there is I use the annotation boxes or the annotation feature. So it's going to be inline grading. So when you look at the Canvas site, your paper is there, you'll see little like balloons, like a blue balloon. If you click on that, that's when you'll see all the comments. So I put them in the annotation feature.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Okay. All right, very good. Well, I look forward to reading those papers. And again, next week is a pretty open week for me. I do have a site visit that I'm doing for a university back east, which will take up a little bit of time, but I see no reason why I can't have all your final grades wrapped up by next Monday or next Tuesday, and then I'll input them and upload them as soon as the university allows me to. So try and get you done so you can then move onward and upward to your next course in the program.
So since we're on that topic, I just want to say that I really appreciate the speed with which you have graded all of our papers. It's really good feedback for me to know where I'm going, and I really appreciate your timeliness on that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. That's great feedback to have, and it's it's always been important for me to get feedback back to you as quickly as possible, because that was one of my pet peeves when I was in grad school, is you turn in a paper and then you don't get the feedback in time for the next assignment, and they're scaffolded assignments. And then how are you supposed to do the next assignment without feedback for the previous assignment? And so I've always tried to get the feedback back to you as quickly as possible. I also am a big believer in field theory, and I really do feel that tension of unaccomplished tasks. And so when I do see paper assignments or other assignments that haven't been graded, I try and jump on there and grade them as quickly as possible. And if you are an early poster into our Canvas discussion area, you've probably seen that as soon as you have your initial post and you responded to one classmate, you probably already gotten a grade. And so I grade those kind of as they come in. I'm planning on grading your final assignments as they come in as well. So if you do turn it in early, you'll get a grade and feedback early on that assignment. But thank you, I really do appreciate it. It's always good to get the positive feedback, because I really do believe in trying to turn grading around as quickly as possible. Well, for tonight, again, I've truncated this session to try and make it a little bit more usable for us so that we don't have to belabor a lot of points from the class, and that we can kind of use this session to wrap up and kind of find those commonalities and those themes. So I'll start out tonight talking about some of the necessary conditions or requirements for effectiveness in public organizations and what the literature tells us about what types of characteristics need to be present in an organization for that organization to be effective. And then the final slide tonight, we'll just look at some of those commonalities and the different theories and the different theorists that we've talked about throughout the entire course. One person I usually like to start tonight with is a fairly well-known public administration theorist by the name of Stephen Gould. I don't believe he's still with us, but Stephen Gould, through his career, was the dean of the Rockefeller College at State University of New York, Albany. Very well-known public administration theorist. I've used a lot of his work before. Stephen Gould focused a lot of his work on effectiveness, but effectiveness in a lot of different venues. I'll give you one example. One of the things he's best known for is his comprehensive study of state lottery systems. And he studied state lottery systems to try and ascertain the effectiveness and the efficiency of each state's lottery system, actually put together a typology of the effectiveness of different state lottery systems. You'll be happy to know that he determined that California was one of the most efficient lottery systems in the country, with some of the lowest administrative overhead of any state in the union. But another area that he focuses attention for effectiveness on was effectiveness in organizations. And one of his famous studies is a really simplistic study, but I think it's good illustration of how we can go about studying effectiveness in organizations. Gould, several decades ago, you can see in 1982, which is shocking that that's several decades ago, but in 1982, Gould put together a study of 10 successful organizations. He selected 5 public organizations and 5 private organizations that were well regarded as being effective organizations. And so, he basically, these are organizations that had a strong reputation as being effective organizations. And he went to see the commonalities across those 10 different organizations. And what he found, regardless of whether it was public or private, there were 4 main characteristics that those effective organizations exhibited. One was all those organizations were what he called learning organizations. They're organizations that supported learning, they supported risk-taking, they allowed their employees to take risks and be innovative and creative without the fear of punitive measures in case those innovations didn't happen to work. They had good systems of work measurement with feedback loops where they could feed the information from the work measurement system back to the employee, so that the employee had that formative feedback to then enhance their quality of their work in the future. So they are learning organizations. All the organizations had a focused mission. They emphasized clarification and communication of the mission. They had clear missions, and they communicate those missions well throughout the entire organization. So everyone knew what the organization was about, what the organization was attempting to achieve. They all had nurturing communities. They provided a very supportive organization culture where if employees failed, there was support to help those employees improve their performance. So it's a very nurturing type of community relationship between the organization and the employee. And they had enabling leadership. And we spent all last week talking about leadership and different leadership strategies and styles, but they had leadership that facilitated learning, facilitate this whole idea of social learning theory. They were leaders who communicated well, who were flexible, and who were able to develop a vision that all members of the organization were able to buy into. So all these effective organizations were learning, they had a focused mission, they were nurturing, and they had enabling leadership. Well, what else does the broader literature tell us about the necessary conditions for successful and effective organizations? Well, the literature also tells us that effective organizations foster effective relationships with their oversight authorities. And so we always talk in public administration about serving many masters, and legislative, executive, and judicial authorities. If you have effective relationships with those authorities, that can make you more effective as an organization. When you have these oversight authorities that are attentive to the needs of the organization, but yet demanding, they have standards that they demand from these organizations, but they support those organizations in meeting those standards, and they're willing and able to delegate the day-to-day work to the administrators in those organizations. Those are the types of authorities that make for effective organizations. And so it's important to have this relationship with your oversight authorities. It's also important for effective organizations to foster effective relationships with other stakeholders as well. So with the public, have favorable public opinion and general public support for what you do as an organization. Having multiple influential constituent and client groups that can be mobilized when necessary. When do we need to mobilize these constituent groups? When there are threats to our organization. So if our oversight authorities, especially our legislative and executive authorities, decide that we're not worthy of appropriations for the next year, and they're going to try and zero us out of existence, well, if we've got those influential constituent and client groups that we can go to, mobilize to put pressure on those elected officials, that will help us keep our appropriations for that next year. I've talked to you again about the idea of zeroing out and the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. I'm still a little scarred about that going way back in 1996. One of the reasons why the ACIR went away is because they didn't have that constituent or client group that it could draw upon to help combat its appropriations challenges in Congress. Its constituent and client group primarily was academics who were getting these contracts to do this type of intergovernmental research, and they carry very little sway with elected officials. Effective relationships with your partners and your suppliers, so an effective management of contracting and contractors. This is especially true today, in that today there are a lot of local agencies that have a myriad of capital improvement projects, and they're going out to bid on these capital improvement projects. There's a limited number of responsible and responsive bidders to bid on those RFPs. And so oftentimes you're competing against other local governments to get the quote unquote good contractors to submit bids for your RFP. And when you've got that type of competition going on in the marketplace, you need to have a good relationship with those contractors. If those contractors are always challenging you with bid protests because of the way in which you accepted bids, you're probably going to lose out to a neighboring local jurisdiction that has a better relationship with those contractors. Effective utilization of technology and other resources. We saw this prominently in COVID-19. And here at this conference I'm at today, the 4 papers on my panel, 3 of the 4 papers focused on responses to COVID-19 and how programs and how universities essentially are dealing with the post-pandemic world and navigating their way through the post-pandemic world. And one of the common themes is the need for technology and the need for sustainable technology if courses are going to remain online in the future. I shared some results from a survey that I did at Long Beach that we were a little surprised with, is that we asked our student body the modality that they preferred in terms of future courses. And we found that online asynchronous course delivery was the top preferred modality. Online asynchronous, of course, being no live meetings. Everything is produced and consumed in an asynchronous, no real-time type session manner. Second was online synchronous sessions, like what we're doing here tonight. Third were our mixed online courses, where we have live synchronous sessions, but not every single week, until they'll meet maybe every other week or maybe once every 3 or 4 weeks. And then in last place, on-campus face-to-face. And so there really is this desire, especially among our MPA students, to have the flexibility afforded by online course delivery. Well, you need to have sustainable technology, and you need to have faculty trained in how to use that technology in an effective manner. Effective negotiation of networks. We're all of our agencies are part of networks. We need to be able to negotiate our way through those networks and have good relationships with all of our partners in the private sector and the nonprofit sector in the networks in which we operate. Some other necessary conditions: responsive autonomy in relation to political oversight and influence. We need to be responsive to the oversight. And so when the overseers ask us for things, we need to be able to respond to that. We need to be able to respond to that in an autonomous way, meaning that we retain some autonomy, we retain some authority, even though we are being responsive to the desires and the questions we're getting from our oversight authorities. We spent an entire week talking about mission and how important missions and mission statements and goals and objectives are for effective organizations. So we all know this, but mission balance is important. We need to have attractive missions that are difficult but yet feasible. And we talked about that interesting situation where difficult goals will motivate people more than simple goals because it gives them something to work toward, but they can't be too difficult that they're unattainable and then creates frustration among our employees. Our missions and our goals need to be clear and understandable. They need to be worthy and worthwhile and legitimate. They need to be interesting and exciting. They need to be important and influential, and they need to be distinctive. We oftentimes overlook that distinctive element. If our mission is not distinctive from other organizations, then the natural question that begs is, why do we exist at all as an organization? Can't someone else, this other organization, effectively do what we have been doing? We need to be distinctive enough to show that there is a reason why we should survive and the reason why we should remain in existence. Amber, go ahead.
I was just curious in regards to the responsive autonomy in relation to political oversight and influence. I'm just curious, how does one maintain responsive autonomy, like in a, for example, county situation or government situation when you have politicians and other, well, the immediate governing body, a board of supervisors dictating? Is that kind of fold into the having a good relationship with your higher authority?
I think so. I think you have a good relationship with them. I think that they are much more likely to delegate to you and much more likely to provide you with what you need as long as they're getting the information they need in exchange. This all goes back to this principal-agent relationship and this moral hazard of how much and what information to give to overseers in order to be responsive from accountability perspectives, while not basically just being completely subservient to those elected officials and their political whims and desires. I know this is something that's really problematic for local school districts and other special purpose types of governments. Because when you're a special purpose type of government, obviously you are underneath many different layers of overseers. And so if you're a local school district, you're underneath the county Committee for School District Reorganization, which is under the County Department of Education, Office of Education. Also that County Office of Education then obviously is going to have some relationship then to the county supervisors. During the whole mask mandate and vaccine mandate discussion, then you have the County Department of Health that also interjects into that type of discussion. All that county governance then is, of course, below the state level and the state Office of Education, the state Superintendent of Public Instruction, so on and so on. And so I think that the more special purpose you tend to be, the more difficult it is to maintain that responsive autonomy. I think it's much easier, though, if you're a general purpose government because you don't have as many masters that you have to respond to. But I do think it's all about maintaining those effective relationships. And the more effective relationship you have with your oversight authorities, the more you're going to be able to retain your autonomy while still being politically responsive to those authorities. So it's a balancing act, and it is difficult. I think sometimes the autonomy that we get as an organization is dependent upon how useful we seem to be to those who are making decisions. And so if the information we are providing answers the questions of the overseers, they're more likely to treat us as an autonomous body than if they're not getting the types of answers they want to get. When they feel that agencies are not being fully forthcoming with information, that's when you start to have this whole, what we call paradox of tighter control, where the overseer will place more limitations and constraints upon that agency. And then what does that agency do? It devotes more and more of its resources to try and circumvent those additional limitations. When they circumvent those limitations, then it's the overseers that come back in and put tighter limitations upon those agencies. And then they go and spend more of the resources to circumvent those new limitations. And it's kind of this self-perpetuating cycle that never ends. So I think it's important to have those effective relationships in order to be able to get that type of responsive autonomy. Sometimes, not to get too much into diverge too much here, but one of the things I always talked about when I was a board member that I felt like I was banging my head against the wall is this distinction between general purpose and special purpose governments. And I think that oftentimes members of the public see government as government. It doesn't matter if it's a special purpose government, if it's a general purpose government, it doesn't matter. Government is government. And government really is not just government. I mean, there are different types of governments, different types of agencies that have different amounts of flexibility and latitude in terms of the actions that they can take. If you're a general purpose government and you're a charter government, you've got a lot more flexibility in budgeting and how you organize yourself and how you hold your elections. If you're a special purpose government, you may have very little to no flexibility and autonomy there. When my district moved to even year elections and moved to a trustee area as opposed to an at-large system, we not only had to get that approved by the County Committee on School District Reorganization, it also had to be approved by Dean Logan, as the chief elections official in Los Angeles County, to make sure that it was acceptable to his office, or else we were not going to be able to get on the following November's ballot. And there was a big concern in our district about timing so that we could get our request in time to appear on the November ballot, because every other jurisdiction around us was also moving to even year elections and was also moving away from at-large elections as well to come into compliance with the California Voting Rights Act. And so you just got level upon level these different authorities you have to be responsive to. And so I think it's a really important distinction. I wish perhaps members of our public knew that distinction and really understood that distinction a little bit differently, because if they did understand that distinction, I think their request of special purpose governments would be a little bit different. And I don't think you would have the same antagonistic type of relationship that we've seen in a lot of school board meetings over the past couple of years dealing with mask mandates and vaccine mandates. If you realize just how limited those special purpose governments are in the decisions they can make in regards to those two different types of issues. We know that for effectiveness, oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very good point. It's a very good question. It's that balancing act. It all goes back to those relationships that we need to have with our overseers, if you will. We know effective organizations need to have effective leadership. And we talked about that last week. And effective leadership, we talked about all the different leadership styles and different types of leadership approaches. We talked about situational leadership and balancing transactional and transformational leadership. We talked about a lot of different theories of how you can lead employees, but we also need to have stable leadership. If we have a lot of turnover in our leadership, obviously that's going to be problematic. It's going to be problematic for establishing a vision and mission and goals, and then achieving those goals that we've established. Multiplicity of leadership is also important. We have a cadre of leaders, teams of leaders at multiple levels. So it's not just one person who's leading the organization, but you have a multiplicity of leaders who hopefully are all on the same page. And that's the important thing here, that these multiple leaders are on the same page with what the organization is trying to achieve. And they need to be committed to the mission of the organization. They need to be good at setting goals. We talked about that last week. And they need to be good at coping with political and administrative constraints, especially if they are a special purpose type of government. Effective task design. We talked about this with Douglas McGregor and Chris Argyris and job enrichment, and the idea of creating jobs and allowing employees to participate in the creation of jobs that are intrinsically motivating, so that they can do things that they are interested in, that will provide them that opportunity for growth. Again, that path goal theory we talked about last week, that will allow them to aspire to superordinate positions, as Chris Argyris tells us. They need to be, the job can actually be intrinsically motivating itself. And when we do have the ability to use extrinsic rewards, which of course we're very limited with here in the public sector, that we effectively use those extrinsic rewards. If there is pay for performance, which we don't have in a lot of our organizations, but that does exist, which does in some, that we use that effectively. That we can use promotions when possible effectively, that we can provide good working conditions. And we know that good supportive working conditions can certainly help to minimize job dissatisfaction. and can help increase the retention of our employees. Effective development of human resources. When you look at your agency budget, 85 to 90% of most public agency budgets will go toward the human resource management function, salaries and benefits, and all those good types of things. So if we have an effective human resource management system with effective recruitment, where we can get a diverse pool of candidates, effective selection, where we are selecting a diverse candidates that are, certainly well qualified for the position, since we're in our era of merit, at least sensibly. Placement of those people into the organization, allocation of work appropriately to those individuals in those positions, training and development opportunities that meet the needs of not only the organization, but also the needs for growth among individual employees. And then when everyone in the organization shares similar values, so that when we bring new people into the organization, those new recruits share the same values of the organization, and our incumbents in those positions, our current employees, also support the goals of the organization. And we have that goal congruence that obviously can help us be more effective as an organization. And just a few more before we move off of this. High levels of professionalism among all members of the organization. Max Weber tells us that our employees need to be experts in their positions, and they become experts through this task specialization. So we need to make sure that we are fostering their knowledge and their skills relative to the tasks that they are doing to accomplish our missions. We need to make sure that they are committed to task and mission accomplishment, and hopefully they have high levels of public service professionalism. And what do you mean by public service professionalism? An understanding and recognition of the unique role that public servants play and the unique roles of the public sector in comparison to the private sector, the heightened accountability standards in the public sector, the additional values that we have to be mindful of in the public sector. Again, things like social equity and political responsiveness and representative bureaucracy and all those additional values that may not always need to be shared by our private sector counterparts. And then we spent a whole week talking about motivation. And motivation obviously is integral to the effectiveness of the organization. So we have high levels of public service motivation among our members, high levels of mission motivation, and high levels of task motivation. So they're motivated by the unique work they're doing in the public service to make their communities better places to live. They're motivated by the mission of the organization, and they're motivated by the tasks that they are doing on a daily basis. And they're motivated by those tasks because they participated in the creation of those tasks, in the creation of their jobs through this whole process that Ardra has called job enrichment. So we kind of know we know what an effective organization needs to look like. We know that. The question has always been how to get there. How can we reform? How can we reinvent government to get it to that point of effectiveness? And I'm sure you've been introduced before in the 1990s to the reinvention of government movement that occurred during the Clinton-Gore administration. Many of these things we are still dealing with today in our modern agencies, our modern organizations. So if you're familiar with the reinvention of government, you know that the authors of the reinvention of government, Osborne and Gabler, and if you haven't read them yet in this program, you probably will read them before you get through the program. Osborne and Gabler gave us several strategies to reinvent government to get to that point of having these effective governmental agencies and organizations. And some of the strategies that Osborne and Gabler recommended to us. One strategy is what they called catalytic government. This basically means that government agencies need to steer rather than row. And what government agencies can do is they can leverage government authority and resources by using public and non-private types of relationships in order to establish direction. So it shouldn't be governments necessarily doing the day-to-day operations. Government should be more focused on establishing the direction and establishing the priorities. And then when possible, you can then privatize the specific day-to-day work features, if you will, to private or maybe even nonprofit organizations. But in catalytic government, it's government that has the authority to then lead and to direct how things will get done, more so than getting involved in necessarily the weeds of the day-to-day delivery of the output. So it's more of a planning, strategic planning, more of a direction-focused approach from governments. Government should be the catalyst as opposed to being in the weeds of the everyday functions. Community-owned government. We should empower local communities and groups to be involved through things like community policing and resident control of public housing, where we have more community control and more community involvement in the work of government. Why is that useful? That's obviously useful because it gets the buy-in on the part of the community, and you then have these built-in constituent and client groups that you can then mobilize when necessary. Now, clearly the downside of that is that it's going to slow things down. It may create some gridlock, it may create some frustration, but if you can balance it appropriately, getting that community buy-in can be very helpful for organizations. Competitive government. Introduce more competition between government and private organizations, within government and between private organizations through strategies such as competitive contracting. Most of us do competitive contracting, private competition with public services, and some programs, perhaps school choice and vouchers. And again, if you're in the world of education, that's going to be a very contentious topic to you. Osborne and Gabler believed a lot in voucher programs. We know that there are some serious drawbacks to some voucher programs, but every local education agency will have school choice. They will have some inter-district and intra-district enrollment that they are required by education code to have. And you need to, as a board, approve those inter-district and intra-district plans every single year. You have to do it on an annual basis. But again, introducing some competition hopefully can lower costs, and the theory goes enhance effectiveness. Mission-driven government, so that your organizations are pursuing their mission and pursuing their goals and not getting hung up on the specifics of procedures and rules and regulations. Again, this is what Robert Merton referred to as goal displacement. As organizations get older and they become more institutionally rigid, they focus more on rules and procedures as opposed to focusing on their ultimate goals and their ultimate mission. You need to focus on those goals, focus on those missions, rather than just focusing on rules and regulations. Some other strategies from Osborne and Gabler: customer-driven government, giving customers of public programs and services more influence over them. This was really the major thrust of Osborne and Gabler and the reinvention of government, is to make it consumer-driven. So instead of looking at the processes and the outputs, we're much more concerned with the outcomes. We're much more concerned with the consequences of those outputs. Are those outputs that we are creating, are they meeting the wants, needs, and desires of our quote-unquote customers? And so our citizens who are consuming these outputs are now referred to as customers or consumers. And our goal then becomes serving those customers and consumer needs. Enterprising government, this really relates back to systems theory and systems resource theory in terms of measuring effectiveness, finding ways to earn money, bring in additional revenues through user fees, profitable uses of government resources and programs, innovative cost savings, perhaps some privatization. Again, finding a way to obtain those surplus resources and bring them into our organization. Anticipatory government, seeing problems before they actually manifest and addressing them before they become full-blown problems. To be an anticipatory agency, you need to have a good strategic planning process, and you need to understand your environment and the challenges that you can get from your environment and how to meet those challenges early before they manifest into problems. Decentralization, a big part of reinvention of government was decentralization. Relaxing rules and hierarchical controls, fostering Mary Parker Follett's participatory management, focusing on employee development and building strong labor management partnerships. This is where interest-based bargaining really started to take hold, is through the reinvention of government movement, where you're trying to find shared interests and common interests between labor groups and between management. A lot of organizations now have labor management initiatives, or LMIs, and there's a whole cadre of consultants who have built up this cottage industry of consulting with organizations to help them build their labor management initiatives, where you have team building so that members of bargaining units can really interface and become very supportive partners with the agency, and that agency management can become supportive partners with labor groups as well. Market-oriented government, another one, again, trying to bring in some competition, trying to bring in some market indicators into the provision and production of the services that we are creating. So market mechanisms, sometimes like user fees, user charges, tax credits, vouchers, pollution taxes, using these market types of elements to try and become more effective as an organization. And results-oriented government, again, focusing on the results much more than the process themselves, and building performance measurement into a lot of the things you do as an organization. So building performance measurement into your budgeting process. So doing more performance-based budgeting as opposed to just simple line item budgeting. Not just asking the question of what are we doing, but asking the question of how well are we doing it? And putting your money behind performance measurement, putting your money behind program evaluation. That's a difficult thing to do because oftentimes elected officials don't care very much about program evaluation, because all they get out of program evaluation will be headaches. That program evaluation is going to uncover all these problems, and they don't want to have anything to do with those problems because those problems are not going to help them get reelected. And so sometimes you get a lot of pushback in terms of trying to fund performance evaluations and program evaluations as well. I do see that there's a question in chat recommending some readings on differences between general and special purpose governments. One person I will point you toward is Elinor Ostrom. And Elinor Ostrom actually won a lot of awards and won a Nobel Prize, believe it or not, for a lot of the work that she did looking at this question of deliberative democracy and different types of governments. And specifically, one of the things that she looked at is she looked at when general purpose governments and even some special purpose governments create these joint power agreements, these JPAs, in order to issue debt and do all these other things that can be done through the JPA, a very, very special purpose type of government organization, as opposed to being done through a general type of purpose government. She did a lot of work looking at what it means when special purpose governments do a lot of the work that typically used to be done by general purpose governments. And what does that then mean for deliberative democracy and people having a voice in a lot of these decisions? And I know I served for a couple of years as a president of a JPA, which was a financing JPA. And so we basically refinanced a lot of debt over the years. And our meetings, even though they were technically open to the public, in my 2 years as president of the JPA, we never had a single member of the public come to one of those meetings. It's just a lot of the work we were doing, the public didn't care about or really know much about. They weren't really concerned about coupon rates and refunding proposals and things such as that. Whereas in comparison to that, when we would have a school board meeting, we'd have a room full of 100, 150 people at some times. So I think that what Ostrom is trying to get at is when we have these special purpose governments, sometimes they're more removed from the deliberative democratic process and more removed from public participation than what you might have with a general purpose government. But I believe she was at either University of Arizona or Arizona State, and she's got several books on the topic. And again, her name is Elinor Ostrom, and I would certainly recommend that you take a look at some of her work. I'm sorry, I missed a hand. Amber, did you have
Sorry, it was mine.
Yeah.
I was just about the rules-oriented government, just about the performance measures, just my experience working at the county. That's the number one thing the Board of Supervisors asks about. And that becomes the question that essentially spurs community involvement. So I just thought that was interesting that you had brought that up.
Yep, yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, it's sometimes our overseers, that's what they're interested in, is they're interested in how rules are being applied, and if they're being applied in an equitable process to all the people we come into contact with. And one of the reasons for that, casework. One of the major functions of any elected official is going to be casework, doing casework on behalf of your constituents. And oftentimes that casework then involves a constituent complaining that they're not getting the benefits that they deserve, or they're not being treated in accordance with rules and regulations. And so that then becomes a major area of focus for these elected officials in trying to resolve that casework. And I think that's true at all levels of government. And there's again, I go back to several decades ago, that great book by David Easton, where he talked about what members of Congress do and how they spend their time. And they spend a lot of their time working on casework and trying to resolve these issues for their constituents, because you get the most bang for your buck there. You resolve a problem for a constituent, you've got yourself a voter, perhaps a voter for life. And so if you can do that many, many times over, you certainly enhance your reelection prospects. And as David Mayhew then said in his book, reelection is the primary motivator of all members of Congress, and the primary motivator by extension, unfortunately, of most elected officials. So I think that's very, very true. Let's go ahead and pull all this together. And so, yeah, we've talked about some of the conditions that are necessary for creating effective organizations. I think we have a pretty good handle on the importance of leadership, the importance of motivating your employees, the importance of establishing high valence missions and achievable goals and objectives, the importance of embedding a culture into the organization, the importance of having a good, clear organizational structure that helps employees find their way through the organization in order to meet their wants, needs, and desires, and to grow as human resources. I think we've covered all these types of necessary conditions. So let's go back and kind of look at some of the commonalities of effectiveness that we have covered in this class. I think one thing that ties all these different theories and all these different schools of thought together is this idea of contingency-based management and leadership. We lead according to the situation. We lead according to the context of the situation in which we find ourselves. Last week, we talked about situational leadership and the balance between transactional and transformational leaders. Reading the Canvas essay number 7 responses this past week, it seems like a lot of the leaders in our organization are much more oriented toward transactional as opposed to transformational leadership. I think that's relatively common in a lot of organizations, because to be a transformational leader, you have to have the political capital and the resources in order to do that. A lot of our leaders don't have those resources, and so their default tends to be kind of transactional. But at some points in time, we need to be transactional. Other points in time, we have the ability to be more transformational. It really does depend upon the situation in which we find ourselves. Again, there's no best answer. It's the most appropriate answer based upon the context of the situation. I think another major theme that we've seen throughout all the weeks is this idea of employee involvement to make an effective organization. Employees need to be involved in the establishment of goals and the adoption of mission statements. They need to be involved in terms of task structure and putting together their jobs. They need to be involved when it comes to things such as learning what motivates them and providing the right set of incentives to motivate our employees. So employee involvement, I think, is something that cuts across all the different theories that we've talked about throughout the last 8 weeks. Being strategic and engaging in strategic thinking. Again, that's very important for mission development and development of goals and objectives. Also very important when you are motivating your employees. Also very important when you are leading your employees. Good, strong leaders are strategic so that they can anticipate problems in advance and anticipate those problems before they manifest into a crisis for the organization. Strategic thinking can help you get around things like last week we talked about groupthink, can also help you avoid having conflicts manifest themselves, and you can actually catch those conflicts and intervene before they manifest themselves as open warfare within an organization. So strategy is extremely important in our organizations. The ability to effectively use and leverage resources, again, a la a systems theory, systems resource theory, that's also been a recurring theme, that effective organizations are those that are able to generate and leverage these resources for the benefit of not only the organization, but the benefit of individuals in that organization as well. But again, I think the most important theme that ties everything together is this idea that the search for the magic bullet is dead. There are no panaceas in creating effective organizations. The correct answer is it depends. Again, it depends upon the situation. And as long as we keep going out there and looking for panaceas that can apply in every single situation, we're going to fail. We need to recognize that it's a complex world. And the way in which we study our organizations and the way in which we can make them more effective, those ways are complicated and they differ depending upon organization, depending upon leader, and depending upon situation. The problem, obviously, with saying that there are no panaceas is it makes life much more difficult. It makes it more difficult for us to study our organizations and to improve on our organizations. But I think it is far more realistic than doing like the classical theorists used to do and look for that panacea to apply in every single situation. So if you're looking for one theme that really ties everything together, it's this contextual approach that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to making our organizations effective. And that's the show. That's basically all the information for the past 8 weeks. I know we have covered a lot of theories and a lot of different approaches. Again, I hope some of them will be useful to you in your organization, especially I know some of you are already in supervisory positions, but for others who are moving in those supervisory positions, I hope some of this classroom information is something you can take and then apply in your organizations. And that's always our challenge in MPA programs, is to really find that nexus between theory and practice, and hopefully that's something that we have done in this class. So that's all the information for the course. Are there any questions or other further observations on any of the information from tonight? Look at that, it's only 6:53. I did it within an hour, so that's a win.
Professor?
Yeah.
I just wanted to tell you that this has probably been since the beginning of the program when I really, really enjoyed this class. It's taught me a lot and kind of wrapped everything together. I think it's kind of brought a lot of the things that we've learned. And then maybe it's just the light bulbs are coming. The light bulbs are basically they're just lit now. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And yeah, that's the purpose of the course is to try and bring a lot of the things that you've learned already in the program and place them into the application of using them in the public sector. And that's why I like this the assignments that we use in this class so much, is that hopefully your chosen solution or solutions, that's something you can actually take into your organization and actually implement in the future. And several students who've gone through this class have done that. And it's been very useful for them and also for their organization. So thank you, Angelica. I really do appreciate that. And it's always a pleasure to teach this course. It's really been a pleasure this term to work with all of you. Your work has been outstanding. I'm always impressed with your insightful Canvas essays, and I'm sure that the final paper is not going to disappoint, but everyone I think has done an outstanding job, and it's really truly been a pleasure working with all of you. So I'm glad the course has been useful, and hopefully that final paper will be useful as well. So thank you very much for all that feedback. I really do appreciate it. Again, it's been great working with you over the last 8 weeks. I will certainly get these final papers turned around as quickly as I can, and you'll get your grades back during spring break. I hope everyone has a wonderful spring break and comes back then energized for your next course in the program. I think a lot of what we talked about last week will be very useful then as a springboard into your next course in the program, because I believe it does focus on leadership. And so I think that will help prepare you very well. Between now and Sunday, as you're working on your final paper, if you have any questions at all, feel free to send me an email. Again, I'm coming back in town early on Wednesday, and so I will be around to answer any questions you may have. So email them away, and I'll be happy to give you any answers I can. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. It was, again, great working with everyone over the past 8 weeks, and look forward to reading your final papers. So thanks, everyone. Have a great night and have a great weekend. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.